What's up, everybody? It's Jordan Tremaine, time for another book review, and today we're going to talk about this guy, The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. Alright, so this book is by Thomas Pynchon, one of the most confusing authors I've ever had the pleasure of looking at their work. And it's not necessarily because of this book, it's more because of this book, which I've already done a review of. I read a long time ago, which is Gravity's Rainbow. Amazing front cover art. The back art is cool too. But this book is super confusing, and it's funny. I thought it was a decent book, but it was very difficult. I was much younger at the time, less educated, and I had read less. It was one of my first book reviews I've done, and since then I've read a bunch of books, if you want to go scroll down in the channel. But this book is by the same author, and yeah, we're going to get into it. So, if you watch my channel, I read a lot of like knowledge books, sometimes even textbooks. I read stuff for information a lot, and every once in a while I want to like pause and be like, hey, let's read a story, let's do something a little more leisurely. And this time I decided to go with this one, even though I almost knew from this other work, Gravity's Rainbow, that it wasn't going to be super leisurely, but at least it wasn't going to be a textbook. So yeah, got into this Crying of Lot 49. It's a much shorter book. I finished it in like 2 weeks, which I was surprised at. But I will say this, having read 2 Pynchon books now, Pynchon, however you say the last name, I think they're like different types of books. Just like for anything, like with music, there's different types of instruments and different types of songs. With books, there's different types of styles of writing. And I think Pynchon has a style of writing that may be more literary than I normally like to read, even though I do like the content. If you dig into the history of Thomas Pynchon, he's like he used to work at Boeing, he used to be an engineer, and a lot of his stories weave together like engineering principles and in very interesting, fantastic, and often like perverse ways. But it's like he doesn't make any idea taboo, and he also has technical knowledge, so he sometimes uses his technical knowledge to help explain something, which can make things very complicated, but also cool if you can follow along, which I rarely can. So this book is about a postal service. Yeah, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but this dude dies, and he had an ex-girlfriend for some reason that he's made the executor of his will. So his ex-girlfriend goes and tries to like make sense of his estate and stuff, but his estate, as she digs into it, ends up becoming this whole plot with paranoia, and everything is connected and all that kind of stuff. Very similar to Gravity's Rainbow. Gravity's Rainbow is all about paranoia, but in that book, they were literally spies. But in this book, it's just some lady that's trying to figure out what happened to her dead ex-boyfriend and all his assets and stuff like that. But through this, there's this whole thing that starts developing around mail and the sending and receiving of mail, and how in the before times, like long time ago, where people rode horses around and shot muskets or arrows even, the Postal Service wasn't this like government-sponsored entity. They were like private companies that did this, and they would like battle over like postal routes, and they were basically the way information got shared. And some of it had to do with sending secret information, so some of them had like some secretiveness about them, and that history bakes into what this book is talking about, which is the setting is in Southern California. It's relatively recent. It seems like 1900s. They have electric guitars in this book, so it's like relatively recent. But that whole history of how the Postal Service has come together, and then it's become a government entity in the Americas, but it wasn't always like that, and it was this whole power dynamic between different places trying to send different information in different ways. It ends up being very intertwined in the estate of this rich ex-boyfriend, and Oedipa, or I think that's how you pronounce it, that's how I was pronouncing it in my head, the name of the main character, who is the ex-girlfriend, is trying to figure out all this stuff and dig through all of these weird coincidences and learn the history of this these different postal services and stuff. that are also somehow intertwined with secrecy and a very, very, how do you say, graphic play. She goes to this play in the book, and it describes in like graphic detail all of these things that end up being clues, which now that I've read 2 Pynchon books, it's like, okay, so I think it's kind of like have you seen the movie National Treasure with Nicolas Cage? I think it's kind of like that, where like throughout the book there's these things that happen, but like little details of them become very important to unlocking other things, and you wouldn't necessarily think that in the beginning while you're like, oh, he's describing a play. Okay, she went to a play. But then like if you've read Pynchon books before, you're like, oh, this is very detailed and seems kind of odd, so this is probably going to show up foreshadowing, blah, blah, blah. But I thought the book was interesting. It was a cool, wild ride into like figuring out clues and piecing things together. But the way that Pynchon writes, I don't know if I'm just like, not a literary person. I'm not well cultured enough or well read enough to understand, but it seems like deliberately verbose and dense. And maybe it's like, oh, he's being poetic. That's how high society literary people write. The wording is a little difficult for me to get through. I have to go back and read sometimes, like reread the thing, like what is he trying to say? Why is he telling me this? But then again, I think he purposely inserts some things that are not as useful to the plot, but because some of the stuff is so intricate and involves like engineering knowledge and stuff, you start getting this eye of like, oh, everything's useful. Like, oh, that was a little detail. But why did he say that? And trying to put everything together. And I think that, well, maybe at least for me, can be a little bit confusing, because some of the stuff is just interesting. Some adds color to the story and helps you develop the characters. But also some of these little details are like part of how he builds the plot to the end. And I'm starting to get this idea from this author, because both of these books, paranoia was a big thing, I think, that he may be trying to actually inspire paranoia inside of the reader by reading. Like, he's talking about Oedipa going through this whole thing, but or in Gravity's Rainbow, Slothrop going through this whole thing, and experiencing paranoia and starting to be really cautious and suspicious and stuff. But the way he writes, like, I feel that way. Not like I'm a voyeur trying to live through Oedipa's paranoia, but like I'm starting to get paranoid, like trying to fit all these details together and trying to understand the story. I'm starting to get anxious and all these kind of things. So maybe he's writing it in a way that's trying to give you that feeling that the main characters or the people in the story are feeling. And if that's the case, that's very interesting. But I don't know if that's for sure. But that's a little thought I had. But the book is pretty short. It's like 150 pages, I think, something like that. And it did even have a picture in it, which I probably won't be able to find. But essentially, one of the main themes of this book is the Postal Service. And the symbol for a Postal Service is a horn. And there's this other symbol in the book from this other thing that has to do with the Postal Service. Again, trying not to spoil it. But I mean, whatever I say, the book is so confusing, I bet I wouldn't give away anything. But there's a symbol in there that's very similar to a postal horn, but not. And it's part of the clues, and it helps lead the main character down different rabbit holes, learning different things. So, yeah, the book is The Crying of Lot 49. If you've been one of those people, because Gravity's Rainbow is like one of these like all-time classic hard books to read, and you're like, oh my gosh, if I want to be a real literary person that smokes cigars and drinks whiskey, I guess, and wears suits and has a mustache and top hat, I gotta read Gravity's Rainbow. It's one of those like things you gotta do. But you're not sure, and you're like, maybe that book's really hard, or maybe it's not making any sense. This book, Crying of Lot 49, I think is a much easier place to start. Not only because it's shorter, but it has way less amount of crazy details coming together. And I was able to, at the end, like, I think I understand what's happening. Like, in the end of Gravity's Rainbow, I was like, whoa, what? But also the end of Gravity's Rainbow is really weird. They like stick this dude covered in latex into a missile and shoot him up into the air, which I'm still not sure how that relates to the plot, but this book, The Crying of Lot 49, I think is more realistic. The details come together, even though it's still relatively confusing. I thought it was a good story, and it was a fun kind of like puzzle to solve. If you like trying to figure things out and put things together, it did a good job of having suspense and not giving the story away. I didn't really figure out what was going on until the last page, and the last page is still kind of like not resolving everything perfectly. So it's a good read. It made me want to read it, but it was literarily dense, and a lot of references, a lot of things going on that you have to connect, so it can get very confusing. But yeah, this has been Jordan Tremaine Book Reviews, Crying a Lot 49. If you're a person that likes a challenge, I'd recommend it. If you're a person that likes easy reading, this book is probably hella confusing, so maybe skip it. But I like to be challenged, I like to learn things, and I like to get really into the nitty-gritty details and stuff, so I enjoyed it and I would recommend it. If you like the kind of books that I do on this channel, I think this is a good challenge. But yeah, this has been Jordan Tremaine Book Reviews, talking about The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon, and I'll see you guys later.